Well, welcome to the final week of our Making Change series, and I'm excited about this week in particular. We started this series off talking about less is more. We talked about materialism and purging, and then we talked about stress is bad. We had a conversation about the procrastination monkey and whatnot, and I gave you this procrastination matrix thing, the 100-block chart. It's been fun to see that stashed away in your cars and at your houses. That makes me feel good as a pastor. And then last week we talked about giving is good, and I showed you the tree of generosity. And this week I want to talk about tomorrow matters. And I'm excited about this week. I want to welcome those of you watching online and at our jail campus and everybody here. No matter what you believe, no matter what happened yesterday or last night or even this morning, we believe that no one is perfect and everybody's welcome. And I think this is going to be my favorite week of the series. I've been saying that for a long time, but it is going to be a good week. And series like this at the new year, they're exciting because we're talking about future you. And future me is such a great guy. I love imagining who he's going to be. I mean, future me is going to smile more and be nicer. Future me is going to be so disciplined. You guys are going to love him. He's just so charismatic. He has more muscle mass and less fat because of protein shakes and discipline. Future me works harder with more focus. Future John smiles and brings more energy and writes messages with focus and intensity. Future John is better at nonverbal feedback communication, which my wife tells me is an area I am lacking, okay? Future me manages his schedule and always has time to see anybody. Future me wakes up before the alarm goes off and punches it in the face. Future me is always in bed on time. Future me has discipline, determination, and focus. And I look at my role models, future me does, like Paul, Billy Graham, and Craig Rochelle, and says, I'm going to work just as hard, and I actually do it. I think a lot of us do this with our minds, don't we? We imagine this future version of ourselves at the start of the year, and we're like, I'm going to do all these great things in the future. We hear this sermon series, and I give you these, tools, gimmicks, whatever, like the 100-box matrix and the tree of generosity, and teach you about procrastination, and all the stuff comes out of the teachings of Jesus, and each week you're leaving thinking, oh man, future me is going to be a reality this week. Here we go, right? And you're doing it, and you're going to become a better person. But right now in the series, 4 weeks in, all of a sudden, there are these noticeable lapses between you and future you. And it's a little bit frustrating because you want to live like tomorrow matters and you want to apply all these things to your life. And you're like, I can do it. It's just that simple. I can do it. And then you don't. And it's hard because, we know Jesus is the only way. We're not superstitious, we don't follow like the dogmatic religion of the world, like secular humanism or whatever, because we can face the facts, right? Jesus came from heaven to earth 2,000 years ago, died on the cross for our sins, raising himself from the grave, witnessed by thousands of people, transforming the Greco-Roman world at that time. We know he's the undeniable only way to heaven. We see the evidence. He gives us faith, but it's hard to remember that tomorrow matters on Saturday night, when that guy's making eyes at you and you're kind of lonely. It's hard to remember that tomorrow matters. Sunday was yesterday and now it's Monday and you're in traffic and it's super cold and you're late and everybody's driving like morons. It's hard. You want to make lasting change in your life. And some of it has begun. But how do you keep passionate, personal growth a part of your life on a regular level? I can vividly remember watching two kinds of people in college. I went to the finest educational institution in the world. Many of you know it's Wheaton College. It's a great school. But I was sitting on a front porch, and I saw this City of Wheaton municipal truck come forward, okay? And this truck was driving, no joke, 3 miles an hour. It was just at an idle. And I saw it coming for a long way, just driving real slow like on the road. Now, adjusted for inflation, that truck was probably $50,000, $60,000. It was brand new, it was expensive, it was nice. Now, inside the truck, there were two guys smoking like chimneys, right? Smoking, windows open. It was probably like, high 60s, low 70s, beautiful April or May day. And one of the guys gets out. The truck stops. One of the guys gets out. And slowly. He was probably 25 years old. Slowly. He's moving like he's been riding a horse all day, right? What are you doing? He's moving like this. Goes to the back of the truck, cigarette in one hand, pauses, take a few more puffs. His partner's in the truck smoking. And he puts the shovel in the back. There's some gravel or asphalt or whatever back there. And he pours it slowly in a pothole. And so slowly. Scrapes it. And then hangs up the shovel and walks back into the pickup truck so slowly. He gets in there. Meanwhile, his partner's just been in there puffing on a cigarette the whole time, right? This is obviously not a two-person job, but there are two people doing it. It's ridiculous. Now, he gets in the truck, and no joke, there's no radio on. There's nothing. They just sit in the truck 15, 20 seconds, not even shifting it into gear. Just sitting there. I don't know what you're doing. What are you doing? Roll, right? I was so disturbed by this, I actually went to the municipality of Wheaton's website to look up how much they got paid. And adjusted for inflation, it was $97,000 with benefits. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. You make $97,000 a year to sit in a car and smoke cigarettes? Well, like not even work. It's just, right? Because the way they worked is just so pathetic. And then I realized that's actually pretty much how I was conducting myself in college. I was like, yeah, I'll get to class if I want to. Maybe I'll go on the quad and flirt with some girls and play Frisbee and, play hacky sack. Remember that? Hacky sack? Dumbest thing ever. Anyway, we'll just sit there. And I just thought, this is actually, here I am judging them, but that's actually how I'm living right now. Now, later on, I watched a different group of guys. And this was a roofing company. They rolled up to this house. I knew they were coming because the roof was bad on this house and a dumpster had shown up there. So I was like, finally, this guy's going to re-roof his house, right? So I see them roll up on a Saturday, mind you, right? And they roll up in a Chevy Astro van. And remember those Chevy Astro vans? This one was white. And they opened the back door, and I'm not kidding. It was 10 guys that got out of this one Chevy Astro van, right? And there's a huge compressor, gas-powered compressor that they lift out of there. This thing, I don't know, it would be like a forklift-style compressor, but they all lift it out. They start it up. Meanwhile, other guys are taking 2 ladders, 3 ladders off the roof, put them up on the house, extending them. They're running like their hair's on fire. Like, it's crazy. They're going, and immediately they get on the roof, laughing, giggling, whistling, doing whatever, and they're double pitchfork walking, peeling the shingles off the top of the roof, just going down. They tore off that whole roof in 20 minutes, the whole thing in the dumpster. It was crazy, right? Then the other guys, they were an orchestrated machine. One guy is opening up the bags of shingles and setting them down on the roof. The other guy's sitting there, boom, 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 going back and forth, okay? They're halfway up the roof, and a guy goes to the edge of the roof, and he starts cutting, razor blading the edge, the overhang on the edge of the roof. And I swear to you, he could not cut the roof as fast as they were shingling it up the top of the roof. He just couldn't get there. They did that whole house. It was 14 square. They did the whole thing in an hour and a half. And while they were doing it, I was so impressed. I walked over to the foreman, and I said, hey, how many roofs are you doing today? And he said, 6. We do 6 roofs a day. Okay, we work 12-hour days, and we work 6 days a week in the summertime, and whatever. I said, are you getting a bonus for working this fast? You guys are you're machines. How are you doing this? He goes, oh, no, we're hourly, but we got to get all 6 done. Work's work. And they all packed up, put their stuff in, left a really clean, job site. They filled up the dumpster. They put the compressor back out, and they rolled out of there in the Chevy Astro, reggaeton blaring out the windows, And I was like, oh, my goodness, that was amazing, right? The problem is I think most people work like the first group. That second group was extraordinary. I think most of us operate about 10% throttle all day long. We just kind of going through the motions, we're not really amping it up. We're doing our job, about this fast, whatever, just kind of dragging through our days. When we were kids, we dreamed of doing great things. When we were kids, we had big dreams. We were going to grab the world by the tail and do all this stuff. But for whatever reason, I think a lot of us reach this stage in our early 30s where all of a sudden we work like it doesn't really matter that much anymore. A Navy SEAL study famously said that most people, when pushing their hardest on their marathon day, on the hardest day of their life, will quit after having only expended 40% of their total energy reserves. Isn't that crazy? In junior high, when you were running the mile and you did your absolute best, and then you quit running and started walking, you had expended 40% of your energy reserves. Why is it that some people are able to tap into that final 60%? Why is it that some people are just able to work harder and faster and longer, while most of us do not? I remember reading my Bible as a young Christian. There's this notable guy in there. His name is Paul. Paul is the kind of person that everybody admires, right? He is the most influential person in human history besides Jesus. He literally shaped most of Western civilization. And he is almost certainly responsible for all of us in this room who are Christians becoming Christians. Someday we will get to heaven and we will see our spiritual lineage. Paul is at the beginning of it. Paul was focused and disciplined. He traveled the world when traveling was expensive and mostly on foot or by sailboat and dangerous. He traveled the world, and as he was doing it, he wrote several books. How many books have you written? It's like, oh, this guy. He planted and pastored several churches that became mega churches. A lot of you are like, well, I don't like them big churches. It's like, well, then you don't like biblical churches, okay? He ran a business, and don't get any ideas, but he ran a business so that none of his churches ever had to pay him a salary. Okay? This guy was amazing. And Paul won friends. He influenced people everywhere he went. Paul was the type of guy, he just never gave up. He had focus, he had determination, he had tenacity, and he had skill. Paul's the kind of guy, if a door closed, he would find a window, he would make a way. He was like the roofers I saw. Paul gave 100% of the time. Paul didn't care about his accomplishments. When you read the Bible, Paul talks about his weaknesses. That's the big thing. He boasts about his weaknesses. He talks about how he rejoices in weaknesses and insults and slander so that Christ's power may be perfected in him and through him. I mean, that's what Paul talks about. There's one time in the Bible where he talked about his accomplishments. Theologians call it Paul's resume passage because he'd rather focus on Jesus and his gospel. The passage, Paul's resume passage, is 2 Corinthians 11, starting at verse 21. I'd encourage you to turn in your Bibles there. We have Bibles on the rows if you'd like those. I'm not going to put it on the screens today. I'm just going to read it. If you are an auditory learner, you can listen as I read it. But with this one church in Corinth, their immaturity and their focus on surface issues necessitated him establishing his credibility in this manner by actually talking about what he'd done. And I'm not in love with why he had to do it, but I love that he did it because this is one of the most inspiring passages in all of Scripture. When I think about work ethic, when I think about determination, I turn to this passage and I'm like, yes, this is awesome. Check this out. 2 Corinthians 11:21, it says, but whatever they dare to boast about, and I'm talking like a fool again, I dare to boast about it too. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I know I sound like a madman, but I've served him far more. I've worked harder. I've been put in prison more often. I've been whipped times without number and faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. It was believed that 40 lashes would kill a person. 39 lashes would often kill a person and result in lifelong maiming or crippling because you would be flayed alive. Literally, the skin would be removed off your back, okay? Way worse than Count of Monte Cristo style. This guy was scarred up, disfigured. It says, 3 times I was beaten with rod. Once I was stoned, and we're not talking about some sort of CBD oil. Pastor, just give it a chance. No. We're talking about rocks, okay? 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and a day adrift at sea. Are you serious? I've traveled on many long journeys. I faced dangers in rivers and from robbers. I've faced dangers from my own people, the Jews, as well as from Gentiles. I've faced dangers in the cities and in the deserts and on the seas. I faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. And I find that relieving, okay? Because I'll be honest, I have met a lot of people, sometimes even pastors or Christian business people who claim to follow Jesus but have hurt me severely or have been evil, downright evil. And I just thank God that this guy, the greatest pastor of all time, encountered that when the church was a baby, like an itty-bitty baby, like 10 years old. Because it just reminds me that there will be people in my life that claim to be believers, but are not. And that's not a reflection of who Jesus is. That's a reflection of people who are insidious. He goes, I've worked long and hard, enduring many sleepless nights. I've been hungry and thirsty. I've often gone without food. I've shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep warm. Then, besides all this, I have had the daily burden of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak without my feeling that weakness? Who is led astray and I do not burn with anger? I love that Paul, even though he leads tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 people in all the churches that he leads across the world, has a time to care for individuals. And that's why at First Church, no matter what happens, every number has a name, every name has a story, and every story matters to God. That's part of who we are as a church. And all of us are responsible for carrying that burden. People matter to God. People matter to Paul, and people matter to us because we follow Jesus. And then it says in verse 30, if I must boast, I'd rather boast about the things that show how weak I am. And that was true. Almost every time he bragged about his weakness. This is the one time he did not. He says, God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who's worthy of eternal praise. He knows I'm not lying. That passage right there, I read that, and I am inspired to be a better person. I mean, that's what I want future John to be like. I want to be that focused. I want to be that effective, that passionate, that determined, and that undeterred by tragedy. Every once in a while, I read about someone like that, and I just wonder, what makes them able to do that? What gives them that tenacity? And today, I want to talk about what that is. There's actually a psychological field that is developing around this specific concept, this tenacity concept. They call it in psychology grit. Grit is the scientific term for it. And I want to define what grit is. I want to give you 3 points on it. Most of what I'm talking about today comes from a book written by Angela Duckworth called Grit. And she is actually the PhD psychologist who has uncovered this new concept that is absolutely revolutionizing the way that companies hire. It turns out that it's become an incredible predictor of personal success. After much research across ethnic, socioeconomic, educational, psychological, and all other demographics, one characteristic emerges as the significant predictor of success, and it's grit. Not intelligence, not talent, not genetics, not family connections, not family background, not physical ability, but grit. It is the single best predictor of life achievement and reaching personal goals. When hiring, companies should look at grit before any other character trait. It's grit that matters. If you want future you to become a thing, grit is the single Most important factor. Miss Duckworth defines grit as the ability to persevere in pursuing a future goal over a long period of time and not giving up. Her grammar isn't entirely correct there, but whatever. She defined the entire field. Grit is having stamina. It's sticking with your future day in and day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years and years. It's working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon and not a sprint. And grit is not linked to intelligence or talent. In fact, intelligence and IQ, raw talent and physical ability are far, far worse predictors of personal success than grit. The biggest influencers in human history, both in the past and today, are not the most talented. They are the most gritty. Elon Musk is brilliant, but his brilliance isn't what has made him successful. It's his grit, his willingness to work 120 hours a week, day in and day out, year after year, sleeping on factory floors. That's what's made him successful. Richard Nixon, Abraham Lincoln, two of the most failed politicians in human history. Warren Buffett, Steve Jobs, they were not the best in their fields, they were not the smartest in their fields, but they were the most tenacious and the most committed to succeeding, even in the face of many, many failures. Their greatest character trait was grit. Will Smith is one of my favorite actors, not because he's talented, because let's be honest, his acting ability is just, there are better actors. As a fairly old actor, he's transcended the generations. He's mastered new mediums of content that I find interesting. He started with TV, hello, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. A couple of guys were, no, don't, stop, okay? He got into film. He made it musically. And then what's interesting is despite his age, he came to be a very influential force on social media. And now, most interestingly to me, he is speaking to a new generation of young men through a huge and effective and high-quality YouTube following. Now, early in his career, he did an interview that I think really defined his success. And I'm going to show you a short clip in which Will Smith talks about why he's successful. Go ahead and play that video.
The only thing that I see that is distinctly different about me is I'm not afraid to die on a treadmill, right? I will run.
You would not be outworked.
I will not be outworked.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
You might have more talent than me. You might be smarter than me. You might be sexier than me. You might be all of those things. You got it on me in 9 categories. But if we get on the treadmill together, right, there's 2 things. You're getting off first, or I'm going to die. It's really that simple.
Will Smith is very eloquently describing grit. That's what grit sounds like in a human being. That's what grit looks like. I will die before I give up. I will die before I lose. Turns out that spelling bee champions, West Point graduates versus West Point dropouts can be accurately predicted using grit as a measurement. What's interesting is that for many years, the United States Armed Forces spent millions of dollars trying to learn to predict which cadets would graduate versus which would drop out because they lost a lot of money every single time somebody dropped out. In 2014, Angela Duckworth conducted a study of incoming freshmen at West Point. And for years, West Point had looked at different demographics like family background, leadership quotient, grades in school, physical ability. None of these factors predicted who would drop out and who would make it. But Angela Duckworth, using her tests, was able to accurately predict who would drop out of West Point. It was grit. It was grit that matters. We've all heard that the biggest producers in a company represent 5 to 10% of the workforce, but they do over 50% of the work. It's grit that determines who those productive people are. It's not intelligence, it's not talent, it's not education, it's grit. The greatest God followers in human history have grit. Noah building the ark on land as people jeered and mocked him. That was gritty. Nehemiah building a wall while Sanballat and Tobiah did everything they could to undermine him. He just ignored them because he was doing a great work. That was gritty. Joseph sitting in prison, stalwartly focused on God's faithfulness in spite of what had become of him. That was gritty. Peter, following the gospel to his very death, crucified upside down in a Roman prison. That was gritty. And certainly Paul, we know about his grit. Today, more than ever, we need gritty Christians. We live in a country where I believe the cards have begun to be stacked against us on many different levels. I'm watching it, and it's startling. Our freedom of religion, the right to free speech, our very liberty, and indeed the value of human life, I believe, is being undermined and attacked by a new generation of politicians who are pursuing total and complete authoritarianism. I believe now more than ever, we need God followers with grit. And I look at Christians, especially those of you who are under 40 years old, and I really believe that in our lifetime, we're going to have to plant a flag in the sand and say, I'm going to be a gritty follower of Christ. I really believe this. To my own detriment, to my own exclusion from society, God is searching the world for God followers with grit. a lot of you would ask me, how do I know if I have it? How do I know if I have this trait? I mean, I feel gritty, but how do I know if I have it? Well, in her book, Angela Duckworth actually lays out a long, academically verified questionnaire that you can take to determine your grit levels. But at most of her seminars, she gives a 3-statement test that sort of can show you your grit level, and I'll do that here with you. I'm going to put 3 statements on my screen, and on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate these statements as true about you? 1 being not very true, 5 being very true for you. Number 1, my skills improve from year to year. How true is that for you? Number 2, I am a hard worker on a scale of 1 to 5, okay? Not like what your mama told you, but compared to your actual peer group, okay? And number 3, I finish what I start. This is a tough one for a lot of people. Like, not 99% done, but I actually finish what I start. If your average there is 4.5 or higher, you would be in the upper echelons of people with grit in life. Now, today, I want to show you 3 points that I have on grit. Can you believe it? I'm doing a classic 3-point message. But I have 3 points on grit that I want to share with you. My first point is really simple. Grit comes before the glory. The problem with grit is, in our Instagram-based society, we usually only see the glory. We see the swimmer win the gold medal, but we don't see the 70 hours a week of gritty practice, of tear-inducing, body-wrenching, painful practice. We don't see the alarm go off week in and week out at 4:30 in the morning without a break. We don't see skipping every social event that would deter or take away from the actual ultimate goal of winning the gold medal. We don't see the strict regimen of dietary and sleep practices. See, the glory doesn't come without the grit. And I think we live in a day and age where we assume that the successful are successful because of a natural talent. All the research suggests that that assumption is incorrect. Success and wealth don't come from talent. They come from grit. I have a friend who is extremely successful. And people at this point, I think, assume that the money was always there. A few lucky lottery-like investments. But when we talk, it becomes very clear that the money came from a willingness to work harder and longer, a willingness to show up earlier and stay later, an unwillingness to take no for an answer, a willingness to call somebody 25 times to get the answer, a willingness to bid the margins leaner, to work for less and to work more. Young men tell me all the time that they want to be preachers. They want my job. They say, I want my job. And I get it. I work in an extraordinary church. I love what I get to do. And there are literally thousands of people that would line up to do what I do. I don't take this for granted. I know it. And I know that it's unique and rare and whatever that I get to do this. And right now you're seeing the fun part. You're seeing the glory. I mean, preaching is fun for me. But that's the highlight. You don't see the grit in the week. Every message I preach, I practice it out loud 11 times before I get to this stage. This is the 13th time that I've gone through this message at this service. I preach before the withering and terrifying critiques of my wife. I put in hours of research. I read many different books per week. You missed out on the years of school and then graduate school. You missed out on me working a full-time job as a pastor, coming home, being a father and a husband, putting the kids to bed and writing papers until the wee hours of the morning. You missed out on the experience-gaining days when I vacuumed the church, taught Sunday school, cleaned toilets, printed bulletins, and climbed one time into a broken septic tank to keep church going on Sunday morning. You missed out on those days. I had a pastor my age call me to ask about our success here. And his church was struggling intensely. He had a great building and a great budget. But there were some issues that needed to be addressed. And look, I want to be clear. I know this guy was smarter than I am. Like, he had a better degree. He got better grades. I've talked with him. He's smarter, more eloquent, better speaker than I am. I know that this is subjective, but he was probably better looking than I am. My wife would disagree. Maybe my mom too, but most of you you'd see it. He was better educated than I was, and certainly better bred than I was. And here's what I mean by that. He came from generation after generation of not just Christians, but pastors in his life. He had it all going for him. But he called me. And I asked him, I said, how many times a week do you practice your message? He goes, what do you mean practice my message? I write my message. I go, no. How many times a week do you speak through your message out loud? He goes, well, I mean, sometimes I read through it. He goes, but I don't have time to do it more than that. I mean, I maybe once. He said, I can't seem to get it all done in a 40-hour week, but that's all my church pays me for. So all I have is 40 hours. I laughed at him. I said, neither can I. That's why I work at least 60. I get paid to work 50 hours a week because that's what a normal white-collar worker does. We work 50 hours a week. Then I volunteer at least another 10 because that's what I ask of our very most committed volunteers. I told him, each year I work 6 months more than you do. Okay? It's not that I'm smarter. You're smarter than I am. I'm just willing to work harder. What if you had 6 months more time every single year to get your work done? Did Paul work 40 hours a week? Did Billy Graham work 40 hours a week? Did Jesus work 40 hours a week? Did Stephen Furtick sit there and count 40 hours a week? I don't think so. It sounds like you want the glory without the grit. You sound like a millennial to me. And he was a classic millennial, right? I want the glory. I want the Instagram moment. I just don't want to put in the work that's required to get to that moment. And listen, guys, the glory doesn't come without the grit. I think there's a lot of people who want the glory without the grit. And here's the thing. The glory is easy to love, but real heroes, truly successful people learn to love the grit. They love the grit. World transformers like Paul, Peter, William Tyndale, D.L. Moody, Billy Graham, Charles Spurgeon, they knew that you can't live in the grit day in and day out until you learn to love it. That's the key to success. That's the key to being a gritty person. In the middle of the third set, on the 15th rep, on the 18th mile of the marathon, on the 6th day in a row of 12-hour shifts, the grit comes before the glory. You have to learn to love that grit. My second point is pretty simple. Grit can be gained. And this is a point where you should lean in. This is kind of exciting, okay? This is special about grit that most people don't understand. Grit is not like intelligence or personality temperament. Your IQ is pretty much determined from the time you're 4 years old. Improving your intelligence after the age of 4 is pretty difficult. Changing your personality temperament after the age of 4, it's kind of hard. Unless you've been deeply wounded and, God gives you healing, it's difficult to change that. But grit is a character attribute that can be developed and gained. What I want to do is I want to show you a 3-step process into gaining grit. And some of you are like, wait a minute. I thought you said you had a 3-point sermon, Pastor. I do have a 3-point sermon. My second point is 3 sub-points. What of it? I can do what I want. I'm a pastor, right? But some of you probably want to lean in right now. This is what you came for, because I'm going to show you how to get grit in your life. Like, grit is factually the most important character attribute in determining long-term life success. And I'm about to tell you how to get more of it. So even if you're not a Christian, even if you think I'm full of it today, get Miss Duckworth's book and read it. Okay? This is important. Now, this is what she talks about when it comes to gaining grit in your life. Number one, in gaining grit, you have to find a greater purpose. This is why Christians are successful. This is why Christians transform the world, because we have the greatest purpose. Gritty people don't just want to win. They have a desire to be a part of a greater purpose that transforms the world. Elon Musk didn't just want to get rich. He already did that with PayPal. He wants to accelerate our transition to sustainable transport with his company, Tesla. That's gritty. He wants to make humanity a multi-planetary species with SpaceX. What drives him to work 120-hour weeks when he's already a billionaire and could retire? It is grit. It is a part of a greater purpose. Paul didn't care about being influential or rich. He already did those things. He already was influential and rich, but he cared about saving the world for all eternity, and he became gritty. Grit in your life comes from a clearly defined vision or greater purpose. What are you striving for? What is the greater purpose that your life fits into? I think so many of us set out with the beauty of youth and enthusiasm that comes with that, with a greater purpose in our life. But eventually, we just come to a place in our mid-30s where we're just paying the bills. Just going to work. I just got to get today done. I just got to make it today. And I think that's so silly. Of course you're not gritty. Of course you're going to be a quitter if that's your mindset. I don't want you to think about paying the bills today. I want you to think about, how is your life going to change the world 120 years from now when the memory of you is gone and erased? How will the world be different? How will your descendants live a life that is different because of the choices that you are making today? How will eternity, all eternity, the billions and billions of years in eternity, how will that be different because of how you're living today? See, we know grit begins with a greater purpose. Our church lost grit years ago because we lost sight of a greater purpose. Our purpose was, we don't want to die today as an organization. Somebody's going to transfer to American Reformed? Let's go visit them right now. Send an elder to their house. Dispatch elders away. See if we can stop it from happening. Oh my goodness. There's a fight. Stop it. Put the fire out, right? Of course we had no grit. Right? But all of a sudden we said, hey, we have a bigger purpose in this. Our purpose isn't to survive as an organization. Our purpose is to transform the world generation after generation, seeing people become fully devoted followers of Christ. And suddenly we had a purpose that was greater. It was greater. And because of that, we gained the grit. A greater purpose is so big, you know your life will not be complete without it. It's something that you can't give up on because it's what you were made to do. It is the passion. It is this thing you go to sleep thinking about and wake up thinking about. It is so big that you despair at the thought of your life passing you by without completing this greater purpose. The second step into gaining grit is develop a fascination within that greater purpose. Okay? They're tiered. You can't do step 2 without step 1. But when you find that greater purpose, you need to find your fascination within it. I love Jesus and his gift of eternity. That is my greater purpose. But I am fascinated with preaching and leading his local church. I love it. I love almost every moment of it, almost. I literally get excited about coming to work every day. Like I can't wait. I love my job. But it wasn't just my dream job. Okay, some of you are like, well, that's easy for you to say. You've got a great job. Listen, I loved working as a server for 7 years at Acapulco Mexican Family Restaurant Bar and Grill with locations in Maplewood, Stillwater, Coon Rapids, and coming soon in Blaine. I was fascinated with it because I saw how it fit into paying for school so I could fulfill my destiny. And I could not wait to get to that place because I was fascinated with how my life fit into a greater purpose. The purpose is the glory, but the fascination comes from the journey. And I think the problem is so many people love the glory but hate the journey. Right? We got millennials, and the greater purpose of millennials, I mean, statistically, I just think is ridiculous. The greatest purpose of a millennial is to get rich, to be famous, and then to get rich in that order. It's like, come on, really? Right? Love the greater purpose. Oh, I love the greater purpose. You're just not fascinated with the journey because you don't want to work. Right? If you want to be gritty, you have to learn to be fascinated with your little part of that greater purpose. The part that you're facing today, you got to be fascinated with it. I find fascination in seeing how my efforts in a small action contribute to the greater purpose that I love. I knew that waiting tables was paying for the college that I needed to fulfill my calling and destiny. I knew that pinching pennies in college allowed me to give to God's kingdom, which I would enjoy more in heaven. It was storing up treasure in heaven. I knew my friends saw me choose godly things and find lasting joy instead of the fleeting immediacy or the fleeting pleasure of immediate gratification. I got fascinated with every little detail of how my whole life could be a part of the great movement of God on earth. That's what the last 2 weeks have been about. That's what I've been trying to help you do, this little step right here. We know that God has a great calling for our life, but that 100-block matrix, when I showed you your whole life and how much of our time we spend on cell phones, when I talked about the tree of generosity, I want you to see how every part of our life can be a fascinating step in the greater calling of God on our life. What is your fascination? What is the thing that keeps you up at night? How can your skill set, your calling, your unique life fit into the greater purpose of God? That's part of what our Next Step class is all about. It's not just like making profession of faith or joining the church. It's about seeing the unique intersection of God's purpose in your life so that you can find fascination within it. Finally, the third step, and again, okay, you can't do the third step without accomplishing the second, but the third step is make daily improvements within that fascination. I've got a graph in here, okay? This is a normal person's skill development over time. This is time, this is your skill development, and this is how it progresses for a normal person. Let's apply this to a first-year teacher. A first-year teacher, your first year, your skill is going to develop really quickly in this area because, you're writing a new lesson every single day. You have to swing as hard as you can. Everything you have, eat, sleep, and breathe, writing these lessons because the kids are coming tomorrow, and I have to spend 6 hours with them, right? So, you're writing for your life as fast as you can, right? Now, the next year, it's not as hard because you're just modifying those lessons. The next 3-4 years, you spend time perfecting the lessons that you wrote the first year. Your skill continues to develop, but not as quickly. And then the next 20 to 25 years, you just spend on repeat. The same thing. You pull out the lessons that you perfected, and your skill is not going to develop all that much because you're just living the same year over and over and over again. And this is how most of us live our lives, our careers. This is how our skill progresses. Pretty much the same year on repeat. Now, a gritty person is a little bit different. And this is what I love about grit. Is a gritty person might have less skill than a normal person. They might be less intelligent. They might not be able to be as good. They try their best that first year and it's not as good. But what I love is a gritty person says, I don't care. I'm going to work myself into this. I'm fascinated with the way my life fits into this, and I'm going to improve every single day. I will not live the same year on repeat. We will be creative and challenging every day. I will bring my very best and then some. Right? And what's amazing to me is at the end of a career, a less intelligent, less talented, less educated, gritty person will be far, far more effective at teaching than a normal, intelligent, brilliant person because grit matters. Grit matters. Gritty people find joy in taking more land every day. One small new discipline, one small new improvement, one small new positive habit. You get grit by finding that greater purpose, by developing a fascination within that greater purpose, and by making daily improvements within that fascination. I want to get to my third point of the whole sermon, which is grit and our faith. Because there is a huge intersection here with grit and our faith. Look, we have the greatest cause possible. Paul had grit because he found this great cause, the cause of God in his life. And no one besides Paul changed the world more than Jesus did. He had pure grit. And I want you to look at the reason why, okay? This is Paul's great cause. He lays it out in verse 56 of 1 Corinthians 15. He says, the sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, he gives us victory over the sting of death itself through our Lord Jesus Christ. Christians were known throughout the Greco-Roman world as being fearless in the face of death. Are we fearless in the face of death? Are we so confident in the promises of God? This is what grit comes from. This is the world-transforming, life-changing grit. This is the greater purpose that gave Paul the never give up, never surrender, always swing as hard as you can spirit that he had. And then, I love this, because he's speaking to the church in Corinth, okay? He gives them this big inspiring letter, okay? And then he gets to the end of it, and he just gives them what I think is the grittiest passage in the whole Bible. I would tattoo this onto my body if I like tattoos, which I don't, so I won't. But anyway, verse 58, it says, "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain." I love that verse. Stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord. Like, I read that and I think, yes, that's grit. That's the grab the world by the tail kind of grit I'm talking about. And Paul doesn't just say it, he lives it. He does it. He lived it out. He never lost focus. He was gritty till the day he died. And we are here today, and the world has changed today because of it. I want us to live a gritty life. And this series isn't just about some good ideas. This series is about life change. Tomorrow matters. Eternity matters. And I don't want us to say, oh, I'm going to be smart. I don't want us to say, I'm going to try my best. I want us to, with gritty determination, say, I will always walk into the promises of God in my life, in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, for the rest of my life. That's who I am. The application is simple. What do you need to do today to bring some grit into your life? We have the greatest purpose in the world, but I want us to spend time each morning thinking about that great purpose. I am not living for this life. This 80 years is not all there is. Death has lost its sting. I will not be fearless, or I will be fearless in the face of death because of God's call on my life. I want us to find our fascination within that great purpose. This is how my time, my treasure, and my talent build into the great purpose of God in my life. This is how my unique set of gifts intersect with God's purpose. I'm going to swing as hard as I can. I'm going to love almost every single minute of it. And finally, I want us as a church to say, we're going to get better every single day. I don't want to love God the same that we do today, 5 years from now. I want us to grow in our faith. My hope is that we would grow in our faith. I want us to love Him more deeply. I want us to serve Him more effectively. And I want us to worship Him more completely 5 years from now. Every day, take a little bit more land, because God has a great call on our church. As the band comes out on stage here, I want to end with one last little story. When we built this church, and I've shared this story before, but when we built this church, my wife said to build it bigger. And I did what a classic good husband would do. I looked at my wife and I said, you don't know anything about anything, right? Which was awesome. Like this, you want to create intimacy in a marriage. That's what you say to your spouse. And I accomplished that, okay? I said, honey, you don't know anything about anything. You can fill a building up to 3 times its capacity, right? I mean, each service can only get to a max of about 80% full because, first world problems, God forbid, my shoulder has to brush up against a stranger. I need to, claim a little territory. When you're, going through the shopping cart line and you put down your little thing, it's your property, and you just take a little bit of extra land right there on the conveyor belt. That's what it is in church. Stay away from me, okay? I need some space right here. I mean, these aisle blockers that Aaliyah works so hard to keep you guys, we're just going to move that out of the way and forget the curtains. I'll sit where I want because pipe and drape can't stop me. It's just cloth. Please, help me, guys. Help me. You can only fill a surface closest to the golden hour, which is 9:45, right? So we can get that one service 80% full. And so even if we do 6 to 8 services a weekend, which we will do, you can get a church up to 3 times its capacity. That's it. That's what the best churches in the country are doing right now. 3 times its full capacity. And we have 720 seats in this building, which means that we can fit 2,160 people per weekend in this building. And I said, baby, Kristen, you're nuts. You're out of your mind. How could we possibly expect to fill that building that big? We don't need to build it bigger. We're already building it too big. I mean, think about the population of Wheatfield. Wheatfield's like 800 people. We're talking about a building that can, you're out of your mind, Kristen. We got in a big fight because, again, you don't know anything about anything. That's a great line. Well, anyway, this last Christmas, I had to eat what I call a cat poop marital sandwich because I was super wrong. We had 2,146 people in church, right? And, typically, last year, our Christmas attendance became our regular attendance this year. And I would expect that in 2 years, we will be at that same spot as a church. My wife was right, which is one of my favorite phrases to say. I want to ask you guys to stand to your feet, please. I'm tempted to just say, whatever, I have a nice life. I've done enough. We're comfortable. I'm just going to get a nice fat dad bod, eating at SP19 every night. We'll serve out our career in a nice, full, comfortable church. We'll meet our budget. We'll raise our kids. We'll live the next 30 years on repeat. Christmas, Easter, Father's Day, car smash, summer at the movies. Trunk or treat, repeat. You know, that's what we do just every year. We'll just go through that. We'll reach people, whatever. Life change, it's good. We're not going to live that way. We have a greater calling. We're gritty. We're fascinated with the reality that God calls us to be a part of eternal life change. Right now, we're praying about a second location in Hebron. Why? I don't want to light my hair on fire with stress, but guess what? God calls us to reach the nations. It'll be video-based. We're praying to get a building there for pennies on the dollar. Please be praying, though, because we've hit a bunch of obstacles, and it's very much up in the air. We'll find a way, because we're gritty. God calls all Christians to a gritty, extraordinary faith. Christians have changed the world because of the great call and the great cause and the great purpose and the great mercy of God in our life. His gospel and His promises call us to do more and be more. And it's not just a few leaders with gritty determination. It's not just elders and deacons and pastors. It is all the people of God doing all the work of God for the glory of God. I dream of seeing every man, woman, and child at this church committed to a global, transforming faith that sees the lame walk and the blind see, that sees people far from God filled with life in Christ, that sees the gospel preached to every tongue, tribe, and nation. I believe we will have a faith that will see a revival sweep our nation from sea to shining sea. A gritty faith that looks at the devil and says, "You shall not pass." That whether I'm shipwrecked, beaten, discriminated against, slandered as a bigot, whether things go crazy or things go great, we have a purpose and a God who transcends it all. Tomorrow matters. Eternity matters. And we're going to take the land by the same Spirit that slayed Goliath through the gritty faith of David, by the same Spirit that allowed Paul to fearlessly face his death. We will not stop until we see the very face of God in the next life. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because we know that our work in the Lord is not in vain. Let's sing together.